Hello there. My name is Midmask from the YouTube channel Not Midmask. I'm here today to talk about a feature in Dungeons & Dragons that many of you don't like. That feature is death. Death is a relatively straightforward mechanic in Dungeons & Dragons. You make 3 saving throws, death saving throws, and if you fail all 3 of those, you die. That's it. Gone, nada. So, this video, I'm just discussing it and maybe some ways to accept it and make it a little more interesting for your campaign one-shot, or just to talk about your Dungeon Master with. Losing your player character is not a fun experience, but finding ways to make it more interesting can alleviate the sadness of losing that character. Without further ado, let's get into things. Like I mentioned, death is a relatively straightforward mechanic. The saving throws, if you fail them, you die. That's it. There's not a whole lot else that goes on unless your Dungeon Master just adds some flavor to it. And that's a bit of a frustrating situation, especially when the process of dying is also you're not doing anything on your turns. You have to spend 3 entire turns at the absolute minimum waiting to die, unless your cleric or your druid or someone can get you up. And this can be obviously frustrating. I believe there's been other people who have talked about the lack of agency that the player has to do anything about it. But that's not really what I'm here to discuss. I'm just here to say it's not an interesting mechanic. I feel like it could be a lot more interesting. Death, or the process to dying, can open a lot of doorways for extra roleplay, or just mechanics, or storylines, or what have you. But I often see that this doesn't really happen. Making the process more interesting and adding, like, you fade away into darkness, but then you see a light, and then you talk to somebody, and there's a chance you can come back, or something of that manner. It's a very interesting process and idea that I wish more people explored. Something that I personally love, but I've never quite done myself yet, is when a player dies, they get to come back as a revenant if their story has not been completed. Say you were only halfway through the storyline of a character, right? And you're getting to the cool part, and then they die, and you're like, well, why not let them come back as a revenant? They have a vengeance, they have a reason to come back, and after their story has been fulfilled, they're gone. And then they have to choose a new character. There's a lot of room here to do a bunch of interesting things, and why not do it? I also wanted to bring up that when you make a character, you should also plan for their death. If it comes or not, doesn't really matter, but you should plan for it. And the reason this is you don't want to be completely taken off guard when your character dies. Or if they die, I should say. Because when you're taken off guard, you're like, oh no, and you don't really get to have like a last cool moment with that character. You're too caught up in the fact that they're at 0 hit points and now dead. You should think of a dramatic one-liner that they get to do, or maybe talk to your DM that they get one last stab into the boss, finishing them off almost as like a trade. There's lots of opportunities for like a final stand kind of situation that, again, doesn't show up a whole lot, but I wish it did. So, just plan for your character's death, even if it doesn't come, because you can open a lot of interesting doorways that normally you would be completely oblivious of. And following this up with the whole death thing that we're talking about here, when your character dies, it shouldn't be met with anger, because a lot of people can get really angry or really sad, or a lot of these really negative things. When your character dies, sure, it's not the best experience in the world, it's not the most happy thing ever, it's not the most, well, sometimes it's not the most interesting thing ever either, but let's think about it for a second. What can death do for you? Think about that for 1 second. What can your character's death actually do? How does it affect the party, right? Think about that. How does it affect the party? Maybe they're sad, maybe they go through some character development. Maybe your death triggers a chain of events that brings in your new character, or perhaps the new villain. Death is an excellent way to bring in new stories, new lore, new history, new characters, just about everything. If you find yourself stumped about your character's death, talk to your DM, and if they're also stumped, just try working something out. Make it interesting. for the rest of the party. And when you bring in your new character, maybe you can have them allude that maybe they knew the person who died. There's just a whole lot of room for mystery, so don't let the death of your character be the thing that just gets you to quit the campaign. Think of a new way to make it awesome. I don't know what this gesture is, but it's a powerful one. But don't let death be the deciding factor if you leave a campaign or not. Just spice it up with it. Make it interesting. Make it affect everything or just one thing in particular. And like I mentioned, death is just a mechanic in Dungeons & Dragons. No reason to get upset over it, no reason to blame your dungeon master or your players, because Dungeons & Dragons is a random game. The dice roll a random number, and when that random number happens, it could be good or bad. And if it keeps just going bad for you and you die, it's not really anyone's fault. Actually, it's the fault of your clicky-clacky math rocks, also known as dice, which is what Dungeons & Dragons is based off of. So there's really no reason to get upset at anyone in particular. If you do find yourself extraordinarily upset about it, just talk to your dungeon master about it, maybe work through it, like I was mentioning. If you really feel like your character wasn't finished yet, you really want to see their story through, like I mentioned, just work out maybe a Revenant-like story, or maybe they venture through the afterlife to find their way back to the party. I think death should be a stay-in mechanic. I don't think people should just willy-nilly come back to life. But I do think there should be avenues to get to that, especially for lower-level parties. That's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. This video was a quick one, probably. I really never know how long these things will be. You know, it says it's like 12 minutes long, but, you know, editing, and it's like about 8 usually. But I hope you enjoyed. I hope your day's going well. I hope your night's going well, or evening, afternoon, whatever. Adios.